Everyone thinks I was the victim, the innocent bride, the humiliated daughter-in-law, the girl who fainted when that video played in front of 300 guests at the most exclusive wedding of the year. But I wasn't the victim. I was the one who pressed play. My name is Jenna Monroe, and I had been planning that moment since the day I found out Harold Whitmore was my biological father. The same man who left my mother to rot in a psychiatric ward. The same man who paid good money to have us both erased from existence. After tonight, the world would remember me as the woman who burned the Whitmore dynasty to the goddamn ground. The collapse was all for show. I needed Edward to believe I was shocked. Needed Margaret, my ice-cold mother-in-law, to rush me away from the chaos and into that locked library. Most importantly, I needed the Whitmores to panic. Because panicked people, they make stupid mistakes. While they shut down the media-confiscated phones and scrambled to figure out who had supposedly hacked the wedding video I watched from behind those heavy velvet curtains, I watched them implode because, honey, the game had just begun. Margaret was screaming at the security team. How the hell did this happen? We vetted everything, every damn vendor, every piece of equipment. Harold had disappeared entirely. Smart move, actually. Edward was standing in the middle of it all, looking like someone had just told him Santa wasn't real. Poor bastard had no clue what hit him, but I knew. I'd been planning this nuclear option for 2 solid years. Let me back up. I grew up thinking my mother died giving birth to me. Classic tragic backstory, right? Raised by my sweet foster mom in a tiny house in Queens, scraping by on welfare and whatever odd jobs I could manage. But last winter, when I was cleaning out the attic after foster mom passed, I found this metal box buried under decades of Christmas decorations. Inside, my real birth certificate, letters, photos, and a cassette tape that would change everything. Her name was Elise Morrison. She was 19 when she worked as a maid at the Whitmore estate. 19 when she got pregnant. 19 when she just disappeared. The paper trail was all there. Hospital records showing she'd been committed to Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital. Transfer documents signed by one Margaret Whitmore who'd listed herself as concerned family friend. Bank records showing monthly payments to keep Elise medicated and quiet. 26 years of payments. 26 years of making sure my mother stayed buried alive. But here's the kicker. That cassette tape. It wasn't some tearful goodbye message. It was Elise, age 19, recording Harold Whitmore as he promised to take care of everything if she kept her mouth shut about their little situation. His voice clear as day. Listen, sweetheart, accidents happen. But if you start running your mouth about this, well, accidents can happen to other people too. Your family, your little sister. You understand me. Elise's voice shaky but defiant. I understand. But someday, Harold, someday someone's gonna make you pay for what you did to me. Turns out someday was gonna be me. I didn't fall in love with Edward Whitmore. I hunted him down like a fucking prize. Margaret's first husband had died when Edward was 5. She'd married Harold when Edward was 7, and he'd legally adopted the boy. Edward was a Whitmore by name and inheritance, but no blood relation to the man who was my biological father. At least there was that small mercy. Edward would never have to carry Harold's actual DNA. It took me 6 months to engineer our meet cute at that charity gala. Another 3 months of playing the sweet, slightly naive girl from Queens who was so impressed by his family's legacy. Edward was... God, he was actually a decent guy. That's what made this whole thing so beautifully twisted. He was nothing like his father. Kind, generous, genuinely believed in using the family money for good causes. The first crack in my armor came 3 weeks into dating him. We were walking through Central Park after dinner, and he stopped to give his leftover sandwich to a homeless guy. Not for show. There were no cameras, no one watching. Just basic human decency. You know, he said afterward, Dad always said homeless people are just looking for handouts. But I think they're just looking for someone to see them as human. I wanted to scream. Because that same father had destroyed my mother's humanity completely. But Edward kept talking. I want to do something real with the family foundation. Not just write checks to make us look good. Actually help people. The way he said it so earnest and hopeful. Like he really believed money could fix the world's problems. Like he had no idea his family was part of the problem. That night I went home and cried for the first time since finding that metal box. Not for my mother. For Edward. For what I was about to do to him. The worst part was how naturally we fit together. He made me laugh. Really laugh, not the fake charity gala laugh I'd perfected. When I had food poisoning, he showed up with soup and terrible romantic comedies. When I mentioned loving a certain poet, he spent hours tracking down a first edition of their work. I've never met anyone like you. He told me one night, brushing hair from my face. You're not impressed by any of the usual bullshit. You see past all of it. If only he knew what I really saw. The breaking point came 6 months in. Edward's grandmother was dying, and he was devastated. I found him crying in his car after visiting the hospital. She raised me, he said through tears. When my parents were too busy with campaigns and social events, Grandma Rose was there. She taught me how to tie my shoes, how to treat people with respect. He looked at me with those honest brown eyes. I want to marry someone like her someday. Someone who makes people feel loved and safe. That's when I knew I was completely fucked, because for a split second I wanted to be that person. Not for the revenge, not for the plan. Just because Edward Whitmore was probably the best man I'd ever met, and he was looking at me like I hung the fucking moon. I excused myself to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. Looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, "Remember why you're here. Remember what they did to her." But my reflection whispered back, "What about what you're doing to him?" That night I almost called it off. Almost confessed everything. Almost chose love over justice. Instead, I thought about my mother dying alone in that hospital bed, convinced her daughter hated her. I thought about 26 years of stolen life of Margaret's cold efficiency in erasing inconvenient people. I thought about Harold's voice on that tape. Accidents can happen to other people too, and I made my choice. Harold was my biological father, but Edward would never have to carry that burden. He was Margaret's son from her first marriage. We shared no blood despite sharing a last name. At least I could spare him that particular horror, which is exactly why Margaret loved the idea of me. I was pretty enough, polite enough, had just enough pedigree with the Monroe name to not embarrass them at country club dinners, but not enough real power to threaten their little kingdom. She had no idea I'd spent 2 years in law school before dropping out to care for my foster mom. Had no clue I'd learned how to research property records, trace financial transactions, and most importantly, how to forge the perfect pedigree. The Monroe family of Connecticut total fiction. I'd spent weeks crafting fake family histories, borrowed photos from estate sales, even created fake LinkedIn profiles for my supposed relatives. Creating Jenna Monroe had been like building a house of cards in a hurricane. One wrong detail and the whole thing would collapse. I started with public records. Found a real Monroe family that had died in a car crash 15 years ago. Parents, and their only daughter around my age. Perfect. I studied their social security numbers, learned their birthdays, memorized their addresses. The daughter, Jennifer, had even gone to boarding school in Switzerland. No classmates to randomly bump into at charity galas. The hardest part was the photos. I spent weekends at estate sales in Connecticut, buying old family albums from houses that looked expensive enough. Cut myself into vacation photos with scissors and glue like some psychotic scrapbook project. Thank God for digital editing. I got pretty good at Photoshop, but it was the small details that nearly killed me. The way Connecticut rich girls held their wine glasses. How they pronounced certain words. Which prep schools they'd attended, which families they'd summered with in the Hamptons. I practiced in the mirror for hours. "Oh, you know the Ashfords?" "Yes, we used to sail together at Martha's Vineyard." Complete bullshit, but delivered with the right bored confidence. The first time I used the fake identity at a gallery opening, my hands shook so bad I spilled champagne on my dress. But the woman next to me just laughed and said, "Nervous about the Warhol auction too. These prices are insane." I'd passed the test. The close calls were constant, though. At a Met Gala after-party, some woman claimed she remembered me from Miss Porter's school. I smiled and said, "Oh, you must be thinking of my cousin." People say we look identical. Walked away before she could ask follow-ups. Another time, Edward's college friend swore he'd met my brother at a regatta. I had to invent a whole fake sibling on the spot, complete with his supposed job at Goldman Sachs and his imaginary yacht. The worst part wasn't the lying. It was how good I got at it. How naturally the fake laugh came, how easily I could name-drop restaurants I'd never been to, how smoothly I could change the subject when someone got too curious about my family. By the time I met Edward, Jenna Monroe felt more real than the girl from Queens ever had. But the real masterpiece, I'd tracked down every single person who'd worked at the Whitmore estate during my mother's time there. Most were dead or had moved away. But one old groundskeeper remembered Elise. Sweet girl, he'd told me over coffee in his nursing home. Shame what happened to her. Mr. Harold, he had a thing for the young ones. Wife knew about it too. Used to clean up his messes, if you know what I mean. Oh, I knew exactly what he meant. The engagement was a goddamn masterpiece of manipulation. Edward proposed on the anniversary of my mother's commitment to Blackwood. I said yes, while mentally calculating how many years Harold had stolen from her. 26 years of medications that turned her into a zombie. 26 years of electroshock therapy that erased most of her memories. 26 years of Margaret's monthly visits to make sure the doctors kept her heavily sedated. You know what my mother's last words were according to her medical records? Tell my baby girl I tried to come home. She died believing I'd grown up, thinking she abandoned me. So yeah. When Edward slipped that 5-carat diamond on my finger, all I could think about was how many months of my mother's imprisonment that ring could have paid for. The wedding planning was a joke. Margaret insisted on controlling every detail, which was perfect for my purposes. She wanted the biggest, most extravagant affair in Whitmore family history. We need to show everyone that the family is stronger than ever. She'd said, not knowing that Harold's Senate campaign was already hemorrhaging donors, thanks to whispers about his past. I played the eager bride-to-be beautifully. Went to every dress fitting, every menu, tasting every flower arrangement meeting. Always agreeable, always grateful for Margaret's guidance, but I was also making my own preparations. 3 weeks before the wedding, I told Edward I wanted to surprise his family with a special video montage during the reception. Something heartfelt about family legacy and how honored I was to become a Whitmore. That's so sweet, babe, he'd said, kissing my forehead. Dad's gonna love that. Oh, Harold was definitely gonna love it. I spent weeks editing that video. The first 5 minutes were exactly what everyone expected. Childhood photos of Edward, heartwarming footage of Harold's early political career, Margaret's charity work, the whole American dream bullshit. But nestled in the middle, time to play right during the toast, 20 seconds of pure, concentrated justice. The cassette recording had been professionally enhanced and synchronized with photos I'd found in my mother's belongings. Pictures of her working at the estate, looking happy and innocent. Pictures of Harold watching her with that predatory smile. And then crystal clear Harold's voice. Listen, sweetheart, accidents happen. But if you start running your mouth about this, well, accidents can happen to other people too. Followed by my mother's voice. Someday, Harold, someday someone's gonna make you pay. The video ended with a single line of text. This message is brought to you by Elise Morrison's daughter. The wedding day was perfect. 300 guests. Every major political figure on the East Coast. News crews stationed outside to catch glimpses of the society wedding of the year. Margaret looked radiant in her custom Valentino. Harold was working the crowd like the seasoned politician. He was probably already mentally drafting his victory speech for the Senate race. Edward looked nervous but happy. He kept squeezing my hand during the ceremony, whispering about how perfect everything was. And me, I looked like the blushing bride, but inside I was counting down the minutes until showtime. The reception was flawless. Champagne flowed like water. The 7-piece orchestra played all the classics. Everyone commented on how beautiful, how elegant, how absolutely perfect everything was. During dinner, I excused myself to touch up my makeup. Instead, I found the AV tech and handed him the final flash drive. Just a small change to the video, I said with my sweetest smile. My husband wanted to add one more surprise for his parents. The guy barely looked up from his equipment. No problem, Mrs. Whitmore. Mrs. Whitmore, if only he knew. The moment came during dessert. Harold stood up to give the traditional father of the groom toast. All eyes on him. Champagne glasses, raised cameras rolling. Family. He began his voice, carrying that practiced political warmth. Is the foundation of everything we build in this life. Today we welcome Jenna into our family, and we couldn't be more thrilled. Applause. Smiles. Everyone eating up his performance. I thought it would be fitting to share a little video Jenna put together about the importance of family legacy. The lights dimmed. The screen descended from the ceiling, and my masterpiece began to play. The first few minutes went exactly as planned. Polite applause at the childhood photos. Murmurs of approval at the shots of Harold's early career. But then the audio shifted. Harold's voice filled the ballroom. Listen, sweetheart, accidents happen. I watched his face go white. Watched Margaret's champagne glass slip from her fingers and shatter on the marble floor. But if you start running your mouth about this, well, accidents can happen to other people too. People started looking around, confused. Was this part of the video? Some kind of joke? And then my mother's voice, young and defiant. Someday, Harold. Someday someone's gonna make you pay. The text appeared on screen. This message is brought to you by Elise Morrison's daughter, the girl you tried to erase. That's when I collapsed. Perfect timing, really. Just as the first gasps and murmurs started rippling through the crowd, I let myself crumple to the floor in my designer gown. Chaos, absolute fucking chaos. Margaret screaming for someone to turn off the video. Security rushing to confiscate phones. Harold nowhere to be seen. Smart man had probably made it to his car before the recording finished playing. Edward kneeling beside me genuinely panicked. Someone call an ambulance, get her some air. But I was conscious enough to hear what mattered most. The whispers spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Did you hear that recording? Elise Morrison. Wasn't that the girl who disappeared? Holy shit, is Jenna Harold's daughter. This is insane. Someone get this to the press. They carried me to the library and locked the doors. Margaret was pacing like a caged animal, her perfect composure finally cracking. How did she get that recording? Where the hell did she find it? Edward was holding my hand, still thinking I was the victim in all this. Mom, what was that about who's Elise Morrison? Shut up, Edward. Just shut up and let me think. Harold eventually slunk back in, looking every one of his 64 years. His political mask had completely slipped, revealing the weak, pathetic man underneath. We need damage control, he muttered. Call the lawyers, call the publicists, figure out how to spin this. Spin this! Margaret laughed, but there was no humor in it. Harold, you just got exposed for threatening a 19-year-old girl in front of half the political establishment. How exactly do you want to spin that? That's when I decided to stop pretending to be unconscious. You can't spin it, I said quietly, sitting up on the leather couch. They all turned to stare at me. You can't spin 26 years of psychiatric bills. You can't spin the bank records showing hush money payments. And you definitely can't spin the DNA test I had done last month. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a manila envelope. Congratulations, Harold. It's a girl. The DNA results were beautiful. 99.7% probability that Harold Whitmore was my biological father. The same man who'd raped my 19-year-old mother and then had her locked away to protect his reputation. Edward was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Margaret's son. My husband-to-be. The innocent boy who'd been caught in the crossfire of our fucked-up family drama. You see, I continued, standing up and smoothing down my wedding dress. While you were all busy planning this lovely celebration, I was busy planning something else entirely. Margaret's face had gone ashen. You manipulative little bitch. Oh, Margaret, you have no idea how manipulative I can be. I walked to the library desk and picked up the antique letter opener. Not to threaten anyone, just to have something to do with my hands while I delivered the coup de grace. Tomorrow morning, every major news outlet is going to receive a very comprehensive package. Bank records showing the payments to Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital. Medical records detailing what you did to my mother. Photos from her time working here. And of course, several other recordings I found in her belongings. Harold finally found his voice. What do you want? Want? I laughed. Harold, I don't want anything from you. I already have everything I need. I turned to Edward, who was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. I'm sorry you got caught in the crossfire. I told him, and I actually meant it. You're nothing like them. But your family destroyed mine, and I couldn't let that slide. Jenna, he whispered, we can work this out. We can— No, Edward. We can't. Because in about 12 hours, your family name is going to be toxic. Your father's Senate campaign is finished. Your mother's charity boards are going to distance themselves from her so fast it'll make your head spin. And you— I shrugged. You're going to spend the rest of your life trying to rebuild what they tore down. Margaret lunged at me then, but Harold caught her arm. You think you've won, she hissed. You think you can just waltz in here and destroy everything we've built. I don't think I've won, Margaret. I know I have. I walked to the library doors and paused with my hand on the handle. Oh, and one more thing. That sweet old groundskeeper who remembered my mother. Turns out he kept a journal of everything that happened at this estate, including detailed entries about the other girls Harold liked to mentor. The silence that followed was absolutely delicious. Sleep tight, Harold. You're gonna need your rest for all those depositions. I walked out of that library through the ballroom, where guests were still whispering and pointing past the security guards, trying to contain the situation, and straight out the front doors. The paparazzi were waiting, of course. Camera flashes exploded as I stepped onto the marble steps in my $1,000 wedding gown. Jenna, is it true you're Harold Whitmore's daughter? Did you plan this revenge? How long have you known— I stopped at the top of the steps and turned to face them. This was my moment, my mother's moment. My name is Jenna Morrison, I said clearly, making sure every microphone caught it. My mother was Elise Morrison. She was 19 years old when Harold Whitmore sexually assaulted her, and then had her committed to silence her. More flashes, more shouted questions. For 26 years, the Whitmore family paid to keep her imprisoned and medicated. She died believing I thought she had abandoned me. But she didn't abandon me. She left me the truth. I started walking down the steps, but called back over my shoulder. The full story, including documentation and recordings, will be released to the press tomorrow morning. The Whitmore family wanted a legacy. Well, now they have one. I got into the car I'd prearranged and drove away from my wedding reception, leaving behind 300 shocked guests, a destroyed political dynasty, and a family that had finally learned what real consequences felt like. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, The Washington Post, The New York Times. Everyone wanted an exclusive. I gave them all the same statement. The documents speak for themselves. And boy, did they speak. Within 48 hours, Harold had withdrawn from the Senate race. Within a week, 3 other women had come forward with similar stories about him. Within a month, the FBI had opened an investigation into the payments to Blackwood Hospital. Margaret's fall was almost as spectacular. The charity boards dropped her immediately. The country club revoked her membership. Her society friends stopped returning her calls. Edward tried to reach out a few times. Left voicemails apologizing for his family, asking if we could talk. I never called him back, not because I didn't feel bad for him, but because some things can't be fixed with conversation and good intentions. 3 months after the wedding, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Brooklyn when I saw the news alert on my phone. Harold Whitmore indicted on federal corruption charges. Apparently, the FBI had found a lot more than just payments to psychiatric hospitals once they started digging into his finances. I smiled and closed my phone. My mother died thinking she'd failed to protect me from them, but she'd given me everything I needed to protect myself and to make sure they could never hurt anyone else the way they'd hurt her. I finished my coffee and walked out into the New York sunshine, just another face in the crowd. Anonymous again, the way I preferred it. Somewhere across town, the Whitmore empire was still crumbling, and I had front row seats to watch it burn.